It was the morning of my 60th birthday, a day that, in theory, was meant to be ordinary. No party, no candles, no warm embraces. Just another quiet morning in my solitary routine. But that day carried a weight I hadn't expected. A faint whisper from the past, as if something long dormant had finally chosen to wake up. I was sitting on the porch of my house in a small town in Ohio, where time seems to move slowly, as if out of respect for those who've lived too long. The birdsong was the only music that kept me company, along with the familiar creak of my old wicker chair, which had memorized the shape of my body like an old friend. I was drinking chamomile tea, a habit I inherited from my mother, with the warm cup resting between my hands. The steam curled in delicate spirals, releasing that soft aroma that always soothed me, even on the most restless days. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in pale pink like a quiet whisper. In the backyard, the morning mist, still, covered everything in a damp, thick blanket, blurring familiar shapes and turning the garden into something out of an impressionist painting. And in that suspended moment, between yesterday and today, I saw it, a small journal with a worn leather cover resting on the front steps like a long-forgotten secret that had finally resurfaced. I approached slowly, my bare feet touching the cold wooden porch. Each step seemed to echo inside me. The absence of any human sound made everything feel more intense, more intimate. There was no stamp, no envelope, just my name, Laura, written in soft, rounded cursive with a kind of care you rarely see anymore. And when my eyes landed on that handwriting, I felt a sharp pang in my stomach. It was Susan's handwriting, my older sister, the same script she used when we were girls, leaving little notes around the house, the same elegant loop in the L, the almost childlike shape of the R. It was her, no doubt in my mind, and I hadn't seen that handwriting or that woman in 18 years. My heart skipped, but not with joy. It was a chill, a tightening, a sudden sense that the ground might give way beneath me. Susan vanished in 2007 on a rainy October afternoon. She left the house saying she was picking up Claire, her daughter, from school. She never came back. The police found her car on a dirt road over an hour away, her purse tossed onto the passenger seat, the keys still in the ignition, her phone dead on the floor. No signs of struggle, no tire marks, no body, nothing, just a silence that screamed inside me for years. It happens, they said. Sometimes people just leave. They said it with a coldness only those who've never truly lost someone can manage, as if a sister's disappearance could be explained with a phrase so empty. I never planned on being a mother. That train passed me by years ago, and I'd made peace with it. I built a life that was quiet and steady, filled with books, morning coffee, and long walks with no one waiting for me at the end. It wasn't sad, just settled. But everything changed the day I picked Claire up from school. She was sitting on the bench near the gate, swinging her feet, eyes scanning every car that passed. Most of the kids were already gone, scooped up by cheerful parents or hurried nannies. And there she was, alone. When she spotted me, she didn't smile. She just stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure what to expect. I told her Susan had to leave unexpectedly, that she'd be back soon, that everything was just a misunderstanding. And for a while, I let myself believe that too. But Susan never came back, and so, without planning it, without knowing how, I became something like a mother. At first, I was just trying to keep us afloat. I didn't know what I was doing. I was terrified of getting it wrong. But Claire needed someone, not someone perfect, just someone who stayed. So I learned. I learned to part her hair the way Susan used to. I learned to make her favorite cinnamon porridge and hum the same little songs at bedtime. I learned how to be her safe place, even when I felt completely lost myself. I gave up more than people ever knew. Said no to trips, turned down opportunities, passed on second chances at love, not because I was a martyr, but because she mattered more. She needed me more than I needed any of those things. And honestly, I wanted to be there for her. Even when she didn't want me to be, she tested me. God, did she test me. Slamming doors, giving me the cold shoulder, lashing out when the pain bubbled over. But I never took it personally. I knew she wasn't really angry at me. She was angry at the hole her mother left behind. Angry at the silence. At the unanswered question. Why wasn't I enough for her to stay? And so I stayed. Through the messy middle school years, through high school heartbreaks, through nights when she cried herself to sleep and mornings when she pretended nothing had happened. I stayed. I never asked to be called Mom. I didn't need a card on Mother's Day or a bouquet of flowers. What I needed, what I hoped for, was to see her grow into a woman who knew she was loved. A woman who could heal, even if the scar stayed. And, slowly, she did. She never said it out loud, not really. But in the way she hugged me a little longer before leaving for college, in the way she called just to ask for a recipe, in the way she once introduced me to someone and said, "This is Laura, she raised me," that was enough. I never tried to replace Susan. I couldn't. But I built something new with Claire. Something honest. Something whole, in its own imperfect way. Love doesn't always come from where we expect. Sometimes it shows up quietly, and stays. And if you ask me whether it was worth it, yes. Every single bit of it. Even the lonely nights. Even the heartbreak I carried on her behalf. Because in the end, loving someone is exactly that. Showing up. Especially when no one else does. I organized a memorial, a simple ceremony, an empty urn, empty words. But the weight of her absence was real. And I spent 18 years carrying questions that never rested. An accident? A crime? A choice to run away? Or something darker? Something my mind never dared to fully explore? I sat back down in the chair, now holding the journal in my hands, feeling the rough leather beneath my fingers, as if each crease held a memory still burning. The scent of mold, aged paper, and something that had stayed hidden far too long filled the air. It felt like the object had traveled straight from the past to find me. My hands trembled, and for a moment, I didn't think I had the courage to open it. But I did, slowly. On the first page, folded neatly, was a note, handwritten. "Happy birthday, Laura. The truth is where we used to play. Look in the toy barn. No signature. Just an S with a long tilted line, just the way Susan always wrote it. That signature was hers alone. A detail she once called her identity mark. Every curve of that letter brought back memories. Summer afternoons, shared secrets in the dark, endless laughter. My breath caught. The toy barn? That little wooden shed in the backyard where we used to spend our summers playing detectives? We'd write out secret cases on scraps of paper, hide clues, pretend to be famous investigators. Our father had built it with his own hands, hammering the boards carefully, painting the walls red like it was the most important project of his life. I still remember Susan laughing as we stained our fingers with paint and made eternal sisterhood pacts. "Laura, we're sisters. Nothing can separate us." Her voice still lives in a quiet corner of my mind. A whisper, time never erased. I looked, through the living room window, toward the backyard. The mist had started to lift, revealing the outline of the barn. It stood there, nearly hidden by tall grass, its red paint faded and peeling, as if time had passed more harshly there than anywhere else. The shadow of the old oak tree stretched across it, dark and dense like a heavy cloak. "This has to be a joke," I whispered, but my voice came out weak. Even I didn't believe it. Who could possibly know Susan's handwriting? Who would remember? My birthday so precisely after all these years? Claire was in Columbus, living her own life. Childhood friends had moved on decades ago. Who would do this? And why? Part of me wanted to lock the journal away in a drawer and pretend it didn't exist. Pretend it was just a lonely morning hallucination. But the journal seemed alive, like it was pulsing, demanding attention. It was impossible to ignore. I stood slowly, my tea still on the table, now lukewarm and forgotten. I walked to the kitchen, the sound of my footsteps oddly loud. I opened the drawer and grabbed a flashlight. Even with the sun rising, I had the instinct that I might need it. It felt automatic, as if my body already knew this search would need more than natural light. I returned to the back door, hand resting on the knob. I hesitated. The stillness outside seemed to wait for me. The barn stood there, unmoving, but something about it felt different, as if it knew, as if it held a secret ready to be revealed. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. I opened the back door carefully, as if something might change just by turning the knob too hard. The fresh air hit me instantly, sharp and clean, carrying the bittersweet scent of fallen leaves, damp earth, and the faintest trace of distant chimney smoke. It washed over me in a wave of memories, childhood autumns, thick blankets, pumpkin bread still warm from the oven. But now there was tension in the air, the kind of silence that comes before a secret. The backyard looked frozen in time, like an old photograph. Only the soft rustle of the oak leaves broke the stillness, a whisper from above, as if the tree were murmuring something only I was meant to hear. The branches cast long, uneven shadows across the tall grass, and every step I took on the dew left sharp marks, like I was walking through a memory struggling not to fade. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. It felt heavier now, even with the sun already rising. Maybe it wasn't the weight of the object, but the weight of the moment. Each step toward the barn was a push against something invisible, a part of me that wanted to turn back, shut the door, forget the journal, the handwriting, the name. But another part, older, stronger, pulled me forward as if it already knew. I needed to see this, that something inside me needed this truth, whatever it was. The barn stood still, almost too small for the weight it seemed to carry. The once bright red paint was peeling off in uneven flakes. The hinges of the small door were crooked, and it hung slightly ajar, as if it had been expecting me. I stopped in front of it for just a moment, but long enough to feel my heart pounding in my chest, echoing in my ears, so loud I was sure the world could hear it too. I pushed the door open. The high-pitched creak of wood tore through the silence like a stifled scream. The smell inside was thick, a mix of damp soil, aged timber, and something else. Maybe time, maybe memory. The flashlight cut through the dimness, revealing stained walls, spiderwebs dancing in the beam, and a floor littered with dry leaves and bits of childhood. My eyes searched the space with quiet urgency, as if looking for something my heart already knew where to find. And then I saw it. In the darkest corner, almost hidden beneath a loose board, a small tin box, old rounded edges, a thin layer of rust covering the surface, a tiny lock on the front, not strong but still closed. The metal was cold against my fingers, yet I felt a sudden warmth shoot up my arm. It was as if the box was breathing, as if something alive waited inside. I knelt, not even thinking about the discomfort, and touched the rough surface with reverence. My knees stung against the dry grass, but I barely noticed. I knew, with that kind of unexplainable certainty, that Susan had left it there for me, not by accident, not as a game. It was a message, a piece of a story she didn't dare or couldn't tell out loud. I stood slowly, the box firm in my right hand, the journal still in my left, like opposite pieces of the same puzzle. I walked back toward the house with short, careful steps, as if I were carrying something precious, and fragile enough that haste would break it. The door creaked again as it shut behind me, and the stillness inside greeted me like a cold blanket. Set them both down on the kitchen table, side by side, beneath the sunlight spilling through the lace curtains. It felt like the room had been waiting for this moment, like I had been walking toward it all along. I sat down and took a deep breath. The box remained closed, like a riddle waiting for the right moment to reveal its answer. But the journal. The journal was already open, inviting. I turned the pages gently, the yellowed paper releasing the faint scent of time and dust. The handwriting was unmistakable. Susan wrote the way she spoke, with confident curves, a slight slant in some letters, and that way she always drew the S like a ribbon on a gift. There were scribbled dates, addresses of towns I'd never visited, notes on uneven pages, as if she'd written in stolen moments, piece by piece. A photo slipped from between the pages, floating down like a leaf losing its branch. I caught it before it hit the floor, barely breathing. It was her. Susan. Older, her gray hair tied back in a loose bun, the smile almost the same as before. But there was something in her eyes. Fatigue, maybe, or a kind of peace I never expected to see. In her. Next to her stood a man I didn't recognize. His face calm, his hand resting gently on her back. And two children, a boy and a girl. Maybe siblings, maybe not, but they were definitely not Claire. My stomach twisted. That image broke something open inside me. The Susan in that photo wasn't a missing sister. She was a woman alive, real, somewhere out there in the world. A woman who had moved on. Without me. I kept flipping through the journal. More receipts, train tickets from different years, hotel names, grocery stores, small towns, and then, between smudged pages, a fake ID, Susan Carter, not Wells. I went cold. She had created a new version of herself, a new name, a new story, and then the words, simple, torturous, Laura must never know. It's safer this way. I sat there, the journal open, the photo in my hand, those words burning in my throat. The pain came in waves, shock, anger, grief, confusion. Susan was alive, and still, she let me bury an empty urn, carry a grief she knew wasn't real. But why? My eyes drifted to the tin box. The little lock shimmered in the sunlight like an invitation, or a warning. The next piece of the puzzle was inside. I knew it. I just had to find the courage to open it. But for now, all I could do was sit there, staring at the photo, trying to recognize in that smiling woman the sister who once swore nothing could ever come between us. The tin box sat on the kitchen table, the padlock staring at me like a challenge. The photo of Susan with the man and the children was still in my hand, her smile etched into my mind like an emotional tattoo. I wanted answers. I needed them. But anger and confusion held me back, as if opening that box would cross an invisible line, a line that, once crossed, wouldn't allow a return. I stood up slowly, my legs heavy as if carrying the weight of years of silence. I walked down the hallway to the tool drawer, hearing the muffled sound of my footsteps on the wooden floor. I grabbed a screwdriver. The cold metal against my palm was almost comforting. At least it was real. I returned to the table and faced the box like someone staring down an old secret about to unravel. I forced the padlock. The metallic creak echoed in the silent kitchen, a dry, almost solemn sound. The lid finally gave way with a snap. My heart jumped. Inside lay a folded letter, written in tiny, almost coded handwriting, along with a stack of papers. My fingers hesitated for a moment before touching the documents. Carefully, I unfolded the letter. "Laura," it began, "if you're reading this, you found the diary and the tin. I had to go, but not by choice. It was to protect you and Claire." The following words were disjointed, full of short phrases, fragmented notes, mentions of them, risks, as if Susan had written in a hurry or out of fear. It was like trying to understand a message left in the dark. I read and reread, but the meaning slipped through my fingers. Still, something remained, a feeling, a truth behind the chaos. Under the letter were bank statements, some recent, others old, all linked to a Susan Carter. There was a copy of a marriage certificate with that name, and rent, receipts from Traverse City, Michigan. I leaned back on the chair's backrest. Traverse City. The name sounded distant, cold, like a word I should never have read. I spent the morning buried in those papers, rereading the letter, searching for logic among the receipts, trying to understand who this woman was, the one who wore my sister's face but now had another name, another life. The Susan I knew seemed to have evaporated and been replaced by a stranger, a woman living in Michigan, married to someone I'd never met, raising children who weren't part of our family. The anger inside me grew. It wasn't an explosion, but a steady burning flame, slow and constant. I deserved more than scattered clues, more than a guessing game. Susan should have trusted me. And yet, she left me fragments, pieces of a story barely starting to fit together. Early that afternoon, not knowing exactly what to do with it all, I put on my coat and left the house. I drove through the streets with the hammering thought like a drumbeat. I couldn't go on alone. I needed someone who could interpret documents, track names, connect dots. I parked in front of a small brick building where a discreet sign on the window read, Karen Holt, Private Investigator. The sign was old, faded by time, but the name felt solid. I went in. The smell of stale coffee, paper, and damp carpet enveloped me instantly. The place was simple, almost forgettable, but there was something comforting in its simplicity. Karen, a middle-aged woman with her hair tied back and eyes that seemed to see beyond words, greeted me without hurry. I told her everything, the tin, the diary, the photo with the man and children, the hastily written letter, the Susan Carter documents, the rent receipts in Michigan. I handed her everything I'd found. I want to know where she is and why she left me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I felt my throat tighten. It was hard to say it out loud. Karen looked at me for a moment, then began flipping through the papers carefully. 2 weeks, she finally said. I'll find out. I left with a strange kind of relief, as if some of the weight had been transferred, as if someone now shared my urgency to understand. But I also left transformed. That visit was more than a step toward the truth. It was a break with the past. I no longer wanted to be the woman who waits. I wanted to be the woman who seeks. The next day, I woke up before sunrise. The house was silent. I went to the living room and pulled back the dark curtains that had followed me for years. I replaced them with thin white ones, letting the light filter through the fabric as if the whole day was breathing inside. It was a small gesture, but symbolic. Later, I went to the market. I bought narcissus, lavender, and some daisies. Back home, without thinking much, I grabbed the garden shovel and began to work the soil. The ground was cold and damp. The earth came loose easily between my fingers, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was planting something. For myself. Not for Susan. Not for Claire. For me. As I dug, Susan's letter stayed in my mind. It was to protect you and Claire. I repeated it silently, as if I could find the hidden key in that phrase. Who were they? Why the risk? And why create a new identity in Traverse City? The answers were coming. I knew that. But the weight was tense, like a rope stretched too tight, ready to snap. And even so, I waited. 2 weeks went by, long, heavy, as if time itself had stretched each minute on purpose, forcing me to live with the anxiety. The weight quietly transformed the house, subtly, like someone changing little by little so as not to alarm you. The white curtains let in a gentle light, and the daffodils in the garden began to bloom with a quiet courage. I often found myself looking at them with tenderness, as if each bud was a reminder that something new could, in fact, be born. The smell of homemade bread began to fill the kitchen every late afternoon. A space that used to be merely functional now breathed with me. And yet, in the midst of flowers and the warm aroma, the weight of the journal and the tin never left my mind. I still saw the photo often, even with my eyes closed. Susan, with that unfamiliar man and those two children, all smiling. But it was her smile that cut deepest, too calm, too content, as if I had never existed. On a cold night, Claire called. Her voice was soft, light, as always. "Aunt Laura, have you thought about what you want to do for your birthday?" she asked, like it was just another casual question. For a second, I almost told her everything, the journal, the tin, Traverse City. But I held back. It wasn't time. "You sound stronger," she said suddenly, as if she had noticed something in the way I breathed, or the tone of my voice. I smiled, a quiet but real smile. "Maybe I am," I answered. And for the first time, I believed it. The words weren't just a disguise for strength, they were the seed of it. Then the phone rang again. It was Karen. The next day, I drove to her office with sweaty hands on the steering wheel. The sky was clear, but my chest was heavy with clouds. When I arrived, Karen greeted me with her usual steady gaze. She didn't say much, just handed me a brown envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. I drove home without opening it, placed it on the kitchen table, the same table where I had opened the tin. I waited for the afternoon light to spill through the window. I wanted the day to see this with me. I wanted witnesses. I opened it. The first words knocked the air out of me. Susan was alive, living as Susan Carter in Traverse City, Michigan, just 2 hours away. Married to a man named Daniel, a widower with 2 kids from a previous marriage. They were the ones in the photo. The new family, the new life. There was a house with a porch, a garden full of daisies, a dog running in the backyard like the past never happened. The report had pictures. Susan was smiling, but her eyes held a badly kept secret. Karen spoke in a low, steady voice. Back in 2007, Susan got involved with dangerous people tied to financial fraud. It was a volatile, threatening situation. To protect us, Claire and me, she vanished, faked her death, erased every trace, and started over from zero. The letter I had found in the tin was telling the truth. Now confirmed. "I couldn't let them find you. Disappearing was the only way. Forgive me, Laura, if you can." I closed the report. The pages creaked softly as they brushed against one another. The silence in the kitchen was thick, but not empty. It was a silence full of everything I never got to choose. The pain didn't come from knowing Susan was alive. It came from knowing she had let me die inside all these years, that she made me carry an empty urn, mourn a body that never existed, grieve a lie. She chose to erase me, just like that. She erased our history, our childhood Sundays, our whispered secrets in the toy barn. She erased it all. The anger was real, not explosive, solid. A stone lodged deep in my chest, but alongside it, something new began to grow. Clarity. A kind of lucidity that made me see, with precision, who I no longer was. I wasn't the woman who waited anymore. I tucked the report into a drawer, but not to forget. I kept it the way someone folds a map before moving forward. I knew I needed to see Susan, not for her, for me, because only by looking into her eyes could I finally close that door. No hatred, no scene, just truth. I grabbed a new notebook. The cover still smelled like fresh paper, and I began to write. "You abandoned me, but I didn't give up." You chose silence, but I choose to speak. Each sentence felt like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Writing became a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in years, and then the email came. No subject. Just a sender, Susan Carter. Laura, I know you found the journal and the tin. Can we talk? I don't want to hurt you anymore. My heart raced. My hands shook, like the past had come pounding on my door. But I waited. I didn't reply right away. I thought about our childhood vows. I thought about how she broke hers, and how somehow I could still keep mine, even after everything. I sat at the same table as always. The cursor blinked on the screen like an endless question. I typed, Saturday 10 a.m. at the park near the church. Come alone. I clicked send. The sound echoed through the house like a seal, a marker. The confrontation was set, and I knew that once I saw her, everything would change. I had 1,000 questions, and at the same time, I didn't want to say another word. That day, I arrived early at the park. The sun was shining in a cloudless sky, like the day had been drawn just for that moment. I sat on a wooden bench near a small lake, where children were tossing pebbles into the water and chasing each other, their laughter filling the air like an old song, the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the sweet smell of cotton candy from a little cart parked in the shade. For a moment, I just watched the world move slowly, as if everything had paused just enough for me to breathe. My heart was steady, but I felt calm, more than I expected. There was no anger in me, no fear, just the quiet certainty that it was time to face what had been left behind. Susan showed up a few minutes later. She walked slowly, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, her shoulders hunched as if carrying decades of silence. She sat on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a space between us that said everything, the time, the distance, the words never spoken. The silence was thick, almost like a third person sitting there. But I wasn't going to be the one to break it first. I don't know where to start, she said, her voice low, nearly swallowed by the breeze weaving through the trees. Then don't start, I replied. My voice came out firm, but not harsh. I know about Daniel, his kids, your new life as Susan Carter. I know you ran because of trouble, but you let me believe you were dead. You left me to carry that alone. She looked out over the lake, her eyes brimming with tears, her hands twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. That same nervous habit she had as a child whenever she was hiding something she'd done wrong. I thought it was the only way, she said. They would have come after you and Claire if I stayed. I didn't know how to tell you without putting you both in danger. I looked at her. Not just looked, but really saw her. Her eyes were the same, but there was something new behind them. A deep, silent guilt. A woman who wasn't just my sister anymore, but someone who had survived the only way she knew how, even if it meant leaving us behind. You made the choice for me, I said. You stole my chance to stand by you, to choose. I deserved the truth, Susan. I deserved to know my sister was alive. She nodded slowly. The tears slid down her cheeks quietly, tracing the years we'd lost. She didn't try to explain further. Sometimes, silence holds more honesty than 1,000 excuses. I don't want things to go back to how they were, I continued. But Claire deserves to know. You need to tell her. Or I will, she promised, her voice weak but steady. And for the first time, I believed her. I stood up slowly, adjusting my coat. The wind brushed gently against my face, and as I walked away, I felt something inside me finally let go. A few days later, Claire called. Mom told me everything, she said, her voice soft but sure. I don't know how to process it all, but I'm glad you found out, Aunt Laura. You've always been my anchor. We talked for hours, about her life in Columbus, her new plans, her doubts. I told her about my longing to travel, to see the ocean again. We laughed about little things, and somewhere in that conversation, something bloomed between us, Not just affection, but trust. She invited me to spend a weekend with her. I didn't hesitate to say yes. The idea of being close, of rebuilding ties instead of mourning absences, filled me with a kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. That night, I went back to the yard with the journal and the letter. The toy barn was just wood now, no longer a hiding place, no longer a tomb of memories. I built a small fire in a safe corner of the garden and placed the journal and letter into the flames. The paper curled, the leather shrank, and the note, "The truth is where we used to play," turned to ash. It was time to let the past rest too. Months later, I turned that old toy barn into a flower bed. I planted yellow daffodils that opened to the sun like shy smiles, and lavender that scented the air on cool mornings. The house no longer carried shadows. Light streamed in through the cracks, and life was blooming again in every corner. I went back to baking apple pies, left slices at the neighbors' doors, and got warm smiles in return. Sometimes I danced alone in the living room to old songs playing on a dusty radio, my bare feet sliding across the rug like they were young again. Claire came to visit on a golden autumn afternoon. We spent hours in the garden, planting flowers, and laughing until our stomachs hurt. She picked lavender to take home, and I made sure she left with a jar of preserves, too. It was small, but it was love in a gesture. Now every laugh that echoes through this house, every flower that blooms, every sunny day in the yard, it's mine, earned with time, with patience, and with the choice to move forward. The pain still lives somewhere in me, but it no longer leads the way. I chose to stay. I chose to bloom. Thank you for listening.